Hello, everyone. I am here with the amazing Professor John Vervaeke. Professor, thank you so much for joining me for a second round with you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so last time that we talked, we were not aware that the world was going to turn upside down.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned just before hitting record, I listened and re-listened to our conversation throughout the pandemic, and I tuned into what you had to say, and I tuned in into your meditation. So it has been great. And last time we talked, we discussed institutions, how to discover truth within institutional framework, how to try to engage it from a individual standpoint as well. What is cognitive science? And today I want to focus more on, purpose, meaning, truth.
Sure. Yeah.
And one of the quotes, that it has been with me throughout the pandemic from your book, Zombies of the 21st Century of the Western Culture, is
Right.
we can condition ourselves into retaining an idea regardless of its integrity. Our concern for relevance can come at the cost of our concern for truth.
Yes.
It begins a circle of self-deceptive behavior. And I don't think it is, more evident throughout the past year that this idea comes as a stress test for society. So let's dive deep into that. What are your thoughts on our self-deception and, trying to find truth in today's world?
Wow, that's a really powerful question. COVID showed a lot of things. And I was very worried when COVID began that it was going to really exacerbate the meaning crisis, and I was worried about the rise of conspiracy theories and a lot of crypto spirituality. Jules Evans has resurrected a term called conspirituality to talk about that, and he and I were on a video at Rebel Wisdom just as the crisis was beginning, and I was saying, the crisis is going to really throw people back. They're going to lose a lot of their connections. And what you saw the crisis do is it sort of did this bifurcation. There has been a rise of conspirituality. There's been a rise of individual and collective irrationality. And I think that, we could contest particular instances, but I think overall the evidence for that is clear. And on the other hand, there's been people making good faith effort to turn the social media world into a world dedicated to trying to get good sense making going, good individual and group cultivation of reflection and wisdom going. And so what I see happening now around this, which is made even more urgent by the news we're getting about, how much more rapidly than we thought it was happening, the ecological crisis is accelerating. But I think we're in a race. That's how it feels like to me. We're in a race between these two movements, to try and get people to really connect to themselves, to each other, and to the world in ways that help them. These words are insufficient, right? That help them get back in touch with reality in a functional way. Again, not only within themselves but with each other. And I've with Christopher Mastropietro, one of my co-authors on the book, launched this whole dialectic into dialogos project that we're also working with Guy Senstock and Peter Lindbergh and a whole bunch of other people. So it's a race between people trying to do that and then people who are more and more being swept up in, I'll use a phrase I used from the Meaning Crisis series, that they're being swept up in pseudo-religious ideologies that are more and more enmeshed in combative narratives where the other is the source of all evil and suffering in the world, and if only we can destroy the other, then we will find the peace that we really want, etc. And so I feel like it's a race. And I've increasingly come to see the United States engaged in something like a religious civil war between two extremes that do not form the majority of the American population by any means, but nevertheless get the majority of the airtime. Sort of, and what maybe these labels are incorrect, and I don't really care because I'm just trying to use them to refer. There's sort of the wokeism on the left and the Trump cult on the right, and people are just, and my concern there is that history is pretty clear that nobody wins religious civil war. Nobody wins it. The only solution is to either avoid it or to end it as quickly as possible. And we seem to have lost the sense of how dangerous this kind of religious ideological warfare can be. So I'm trying not to sound either pessimistic or optimistic because I see there's these two movements at work, and they're both growing, and they both right, and they're both gathering more members, and I don't know who's going to win the race, to tell you the truth. I really don't. I don't. I mean, I don't see the necessary changes we need to. We need to make fundamental changes in our way of thinking and being with each other and being with the world and our lifestyle if we're going to save the planet. I think that's, and I don't see that being that change that we need to fundamentally make, which is very much a comprehensive cultural change. I don't think that we're needing to do that. Here, I'll just say one more thing, which is, in order to make the kind of comprehensive changes within individual and collective lives, a huge cultural cognitive transformation, the only things that have done that successfully in the past are religions. But the religion, and I sometimes call it the religion, that it's not a religion. The religion that we need right now, the space for that, if you'll allow me, is being taken up by this increasingly dangerous religious civil war, the culture wars, as they're called, so that the space needed to grow the religious transformation that we need in order to save the planet is being consumed. Now there's other people trying to create the alternative. And it's interesting that how this is the different kind of spiritual religious feel that this other thing, because we call it this corner of the internet, and there's a whole bunch of us, and there's a whole bunch of communities and communities of practice, and the different feeling there, and the way that people who have very significant official religious positions can nevertheless enter into good faith communing and and really creative dialogue with each other. So I'm not trying to say we're doomed, but you asked me what my sense is of the situation right now. That's what I'm sensing right now.
Wow. Yeah, it's, if I could speak with you like twice a week rather than twice every so years, I would be amazing, because you touched on so many ideas that we can go everywhere to discuss, so many different roads. But I read in Twitter that someone, the person who took the goal of disconnecting us from one another and from nature and from the universe, from consciousness, from ourselves, did a hell of a job. And that stuck with me, like
yeah.
People who genuinely, it wasn't, I don't think it was on purpose. It just happened. We got ourselves obsessed with the idea of trying to make progress, be it technological progress, be it, then I think we forgot ourselves within the road. And I think we forgot ourselves. We discussed also last year, we discussed the grassy narrows, right? How the destruction of home.
Yeah.
And I thought about it a lot, people in lockdown, with how with the relationship within home and with the people we love ourselves with 24/7 with them, and it showed a lot of things. It showed a
Yeah.
lot of things,
Yep.
good things and bad things being together.
Yeah, the domicile you're talking about, that was one of my concerns, and Chris and I talked about it, that domicile was going to be increased, and we're seeing good evidence about that horrible result, that there's increased, a lot of relationships fractured,
Yeah.
a lot of people suffering loneliness, mental health issues have gotten significantly worse. I don't know if there's any clear scientific data on it, but there seems to be some preliminary data indicating an increase in domestic violence and substance abuse. I read some evidence that substance abuse has definitely gone up during COVID. So there's a lot of evidence for that.
Yeah. And
go ahead.
If I can jump in right quickly, I feel like, all of these that you're mentioning, the substance abuse and everything, I feel like for my standpoint, being in lockdown made me realize that there's, there's, if you could see the metaphor as your own thoughts being like an email, and you see 1,000 emails unread, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're not commuting to work, you're not engaging with other people. The emails started to increase in notifications. No, they're desperate for your attention. Your thoughts want attention.
Yes.
And I feel like it was tough, overwhelming to just see everything coming at you instantly,
Yes.
So that's why I feel many people turn into drinking wine, smoking, playing video games, to put it bluntly, just numbing themselves because it's too much. We've never discussed how to engage with truth with oneself, because we really didn't need it. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
No, I think that's very well said. And that's one of the great, it's almost a paradox. Our culture is, in many ways, many people have commented on this, it's because of its individualism and the idea of, progressively more and more instantaneous gratification.
Yeah.
Our culture encourages people to be very self-centered. That's why a lot of people have talked about, an epidemic of narcissism and things like that. What the narcissism shows is that although we're self-focused, we're not self-learning. And those aren't the same thing. We want everything to be focused on us, but when we are actually thrown back into our subjectivity and the world of ourself and what it is and our character, and as you said, the way your mind has a mind of its own, if you'll allow me to pun, and what people discover is that without a deeply developed and seriously curated and vetted ecology of practices, the self is a horrible place to be. It can be a very horrible place to be. And so I want to be really careful here. I'm not trying to be condemning of people. I felt it too. And I'm sure people who don't have, an extensive meditative practice and a movement practice and dialogical practices and communities of practice. I had all of those. I was very fortunate also in the work I did. I didn't have to stop working. But even within that, there's a sense of, that people were forced to confront that there's a big difference between being self-centered and knowing yourself, the way Socrates said you needed to know yourself. And those aren't the same thing. And in fact, one of the greatest bullshit ways we can self-deceive ourselves is we confuse the salience of ourselves with the understanding of ourselves. And those aren't the same thing at all. I mean, that's what bullshit does. It makes you pay attention to how salient something is without you caring about if you actually deeply understand it. And so I think I totally agree with what you said about that. We get thrown back on, and all we have are structures that are very self-salient, but we don't have practices that bring the needed increase in self-understanding and self-transformation that that will help us address, when we're suddenly thrown back on ourselves and isolated in a very significant way. And I think that hammered a lot of people very hard. And I agree. There's lots of self-numbing, and then there's lots of self-distraction going on. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I loved how you say self-focused is not equal to self-learning. And one of the, when I began to think on how to self-learn, I was excited. I genuinely, I was looking forward to the adventure, but
Yeah.
no one disclosed that this adventure had its ups and downs.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Very much.
when the downs really hit you, I begin to get myself far away from unpleasant feelings. But those are the gems. Those are the genuine.
Yeah.
Those are the diamonds of being,
Yeah.
of self-learning. And I feel like all of these self-help movements and improving, they don't disclose that. So
I agree with you.
At the moment when someone feels uncomfortable, it happened to me. I was just about to say, I'm not doing it right. I must feel perfectly fine with myself all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's the challenge. I feel like this might be a very far-fetched metaphor, but going into the lockdowns once more, it was like the universe telling us explicitly, you need to go inward. You need to go inward. And I think I don't want to say we fumbled it. I just want to say we're, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, we're seeing the challenges of climate change and of society and of relationships, being more and more explicit, more and more visible.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like our time to, not lecture one another, but rather be with one another is decreasing. So there's this quote that I loved, that on terms of relationships that you said in your book: we're surrounded by strangers, but for stretches of our history, strangers have not been as strange as they are now.
Yes.
And one could see it both ways, right? Is it a bad thing that we're strangers? And on the other hand, it's a good thing. There's innocence. I can get to know you firsthand, like a new person, right? So how can we approach, relationships in today's world to make the best of it?
Well, it depends which kind of relationship you're talking about. I've been trying to get some distinctions into our language, even making a distinction between friendship and fellowship. I don't think you can be friends with friends in a deep way that Aristotle meant it, with 20 people. But I think you can be in fellowship with them, which has its own kind of intimacy and communing and connecting. And that's also different from being a collaborator. And we've tried to collapse them all into the same thing. We've tried to make, in some ways, we've tried to make our work life and our romantic relationships, these two things, carry all the burdens of community and all the burden of fellowship and all the burdens of belonging to a tradition and all the burdens of tapping into distributed cognition for some kind of realization of collective intelligence, but we don't usually do that in a way that's directed towards cultivating wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what people need to start thinking about is getting more, I think this is the right word, getting more refined in their taxonomy, in their understanding of the kind of relationships they can have.
Right.
And instead of letting that run intuitively and implicitly and just being guided by sort of popular cultural models, which are not particularly helpful, about doing, some serious reading on different kinds of friendships, different kinds of love, different kinds of connection, and working, and it's hard work.
Yeah.
Believe me, I screw it up. But doing the hard work of not confusing these together, and getting clear with each other. Now, Chris and I and Guy and also help from Jordan Hall and other people, we're creating this sequence of practices. A couple weekends ago, Chris and Guy and I ran a workshop. We teach people a meditative practice, a contemplative practice. Then we teach them basic circling practices. Then we teach them philosophical fellowship. And then we teach them dialectic and dialogos, so people can get a sense of how to cultivate that fellowship, that philia, that's what philia originally meant, of wisdom, the philosophia, the collective love of wisdom, and in which their self-transcendence is affording the self-transcendence of others, and people are resonating. And when it was very well attended, and the result was overwhelming, like just overwhelming what people were, because people, it's amazing how often people said, I didn't realize this kind of intimacy and connection was possible.
Wow.
Because you either had to have, right, you were either in a romantic relationship or a friendship that built up over a long period of time. And please remember, I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying, right, there's this other thing we need that is basically the kind of connectedness that builds satisfying, rich communities.
Mm-hmm.
Communities that are not just neighborhoods, but communities in which, like, and so the model, and like I said earlier, and the things that have done this in the past for religion, the model is something like a church or a synagogue where people meet, and the point of meeting is not to do some particular work project. The point isn't, right, that they're friends, but the point is, nevertheless, there's this deep and profound bond that gives them a tradition, gives them a home where they can tap into the collective intelligence of a distributed cognition so that they can seriously cultivate virtue and wisdom within themselves and deeply with others, because those are inseparable from each other. If you try to always transcend yourself by yourself, you're trying, it's like you're trying to climb up, right, a one-sided ladder or something like that, right? You're just not, right? We learn to self-transcend by indwelling other people and then internalizing them into us. That's how we get our models of self-transcendence. That's how we get the capacity to do it. The reverse is also the case. Communities require individuals to transform them by constantly engaging in this process of self-transcendence. What I'm trying to argue for is this deep interdependence, and that you need to cultivate kinds of relationships that are dedicated to that. We need our friendships for the reasons we have our friendships. We need our romantic relationships. Some of us don't, but for those of us who do, we need them largely for our attachment issues, emotional support. We need our friendships because we need people, right, that can help us reflect our values and help us guide us. But we also need fellowship. And so a question I would ask in response to you is, right, everybody should ask themselves, where am I going to find a home for a fellowship of wisdom?
But let's say the path to enlightenment is individual, no? Let's say someone didn't engage with the community, didn't do it, be it because of lockdowns, be it because he's an introvert, and something like that. How can, someone who truly reached an enlightenment stage be with their relationships or keep the relationships together even if the other ones are not in the same path, because they're good relationships, is that possible?
It's hard. It's very hard. See, even let's say a good relationship, and I want to be careful here. I think it's important to have good acquaintances. These are people that you are on good terms with, but you're not pursuing any sort of intimate connection with them. But and we need that too. We need, So I'm not denying that, but let's say what you're talking about, like I assume you're talking about, your important relationships, ones that are long lasting and in which you cultivate some kind of intimacy. And in in contrast to an acquaintance, or in contrast to a buddy, and buddies, people, buddies are people that we have fun with together. Friendship and fellowship differ from buddies and acquaintances. And I'll say one more time, I'm not saying you shouldn't have buddies and acquaintances, okay? But the mutual affordance of growth is central to friendship and to fellowship. And if somebody is growing, especially in that kind of Socratic self-knowledge, and if they're growing and their friends or the people that they're in fellowship with are not growing, or growing in a very different direction,
right,
that's very hard. In fact, I tell people that it's very likely that if you find yourself, I don't mean you haven't put effort into it, but you also have to find yourself, if you find yourself you're on a genuine path of growth, you're probably going to lose some friends. Your romantic relationship might come to an end. Because, and this is not through any malice or even defect in the people that you're with. It can often just be it can simply be the result of timing.
yeah,
They are not on a growth arc and you are. And again, that doesn't mean you're sort of morally superior or anything like that. That'll get you into all kinds of trouble. But you will start to, if you're moving in the direction of wisdom and enlightenment, you're going to start to have a change in your values.
yeah,
You're going to start to have a significant change in how you want to spend your time. You're going to want to share things you've been reading, things you've been learning. And your friends won't be interested in that. And they might even find it threatening. And so, I mean, I want to be really honest with people about this. Your question deserves deep honesty. What I can say is that doesn't necessarily happen. Sometimes when you catch fire, your friends will too. And that's wonderful. That's been the case for some of my friendships. You will also find new relationships that will be set on a footing of fellowship or a spiritual friendship, as opposed to just a cultural friendship.
yeah,
So I want to be really honest with people. If you expect that there will be no significant change in your social network, I think you should seriously challenge that expectation. What you can expect is, while there will surely be a change in the quantity and the configuration of your social network, there will also be the chance, the real probability of an improved quality and a new configuration that is supportive of your growth as you continue on your path. Sorry, I know that's not particular. I mean, that's a little bit harsh in places, and I have no desire to be harsh. I really don't.
it's not that way. If you have this mental model, I want to speak truth, it can't be harsh, even though it is harsh, So I've been thinking, what you said, and I feel that the typical idea, the typical notion that I have on someone being enlightened, truly enlightened, I'm not even close, and I don't think I won't be for a lot of time, but I feel like enlightened people really just shy away from society. They don't want to partake in it. They don't want to, people don't want to be engaged in society. And I feel like what I'm trying to say is, if I envision myself in a truly enlightened position, I feel that I would have this responsibility to bring others with me, as well as, trying to create change. I don't know, so how can we navigate towards both sides, being with society, but not
Yes.
being sunken into the negative
Yeah.
aspects,
Yeah. And St. Paul in the New Testament says, being in the world, but not of the world.
Right.
And you have Plato's model of the philosopher that goes up and sees the sun, sees the good, but returns back down to the cave. Or you have the Buddha, he achieves enlightenment, but the gods or the bodhisattva, the mythology differs, come to him and say, no, but don't go. There are people that can achieve enlightenment also. Go and preach.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, I have some models of people that I think were enlightened, or at least much farther along the path to enlightenment than I am, who nevertheless were capable of finding that razor's edge that you're talking about, where they could be deeply engaged with the world, and yet they weren't bound to the world in the sense that they their sense of themselves and who they were was totally dictated by their cultural milieu, the cultural historical milieu. So, Socrates comes to mind as a clear figure for me, somebody who goes into the agora, goes into the marketplace, talks to anybody who will talk to him, right? He's given the chance when he's threatened, when his life is threatened, to leave Athens, but he refuses, he stays, right? So for me, he's a model of somebody who, and the Stoics took this up too, unlike the Cynics who left Athens, Diogenes living outside in a barrel, the Stoics stay in the city and they try to, right? They try to engage with the corruption of the city while cultivating wisdom. And Socrates is trying to wake up his fellow citizens, I think with genuine love and care, but he's also resisting the corrupting influences around him. And I don't just mean moral corruption, I mean also cognitive corruption, sort of the decadence in the quality of thought that people were individually and collectively engaging in. And so there are models that are available to people that we can look at, and we can study them seriously about, and how did these people live their lives? One of my favorite quotes from Marcus Aurelius is, "It's possible to be happy even in a palace," which is really that like, I want to be able to get to that place where I could cultivate that sensibility, right? Where he's in a palace, and for most of us that would overwhelm us. We know the stories of what happens when people become wealthy, and right, and yet, right, but he doesn't need to leave to get away from that either. He can stay in the palace and still find happiness.
Yeah.
And for me, that's I'm not trying to criticize Siddhartha. Siddhartha had to leave his palace, but Marcus Aurelius stayed, and he became an emperor, and yet he nevertheless remained like uncorrupted. And even his enemies said this, by the power and by the involvement and the immersion. And he was far from perfect. I don't think he would consider himself enlightened. He had and people forget this when they're reading Marcus Aurelius. He had a bad temper, and he had to work on it a lot. And but luckily we have his book, Meditations, that give us an indication of kinds of practices you can engage in that allow you to do this. And I would recommend, for that specific issue, and it's amazing how particular traditions have particular strength issues, that for that particular issue, how to be in the world but not of the world, I think Stoicism gives tremendous practical advice. Now, Christianity also has struggled with this, but I'm not so sure that it's giving clear advice to people anymore. With the emergence and the dominance of the prosperity gospel, especially in the United States, that separation has largely disappeared. Right, being in the world but not of the world. I'm not saying Christianity historically doesn't have resources, but I think right now, given our particular historical context, Stoicism gives a much clearer set of practices for how to be in the world, but not of the world.
Is it true, that the ego is a force that interferes with our abilities to reach enlightenment?
Chris, Master Pietro, and Greg and Reikis and I did a series together in which we were trying to practice and exemplify and also cultivate running a linear argument, but also circling it with dialogos. And it was called the elusive eye on the nature and function of the self. And we go through, right, a lot of the questions around the self. And the problem when people talk about ego and self is they are often talking equivocally. They mean many different things in many different ways. And when people say there's a self or there's a no self, right? Well, Buddhism says there's no self, but I can point you to, Zen Buddhist authors who'll say, oh, but what you find is your true self, and right. And so I think the complexity of the responses that we see out there and all the different meanings is something we should pay attention to. It reflects the fact that the phenomenon we're talking about is a very complex phenomenon. And so we have to get very clear about what we mean by ego. If we mean a kind of egocentrism, then there's a sense in which I don't think we can, but I also say we shouldn't strive to eradicate that, or you're going to starve. You're right. I mean, the Buddha tried that. He tried to completely eradicate taking care of himself and, eating and drinking. Like he tried, radical asceticism and that self kind of that's self-destructiveness.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the profound lessons we need to take from Siddhartha Gautama is that's not the middle path. That's not the way. I strongly resist the attempt to deify or to demonize any particular faculty. So it's right, like, oh, it's your ego. No, it's your emotions. No, or no, you should trust your heart, or like all of these things are functional. All of these faculties are functional, but precisely, and I mean this deeply, precisely because they're functional, they are perpetually susceptible to malfunctioning. And trying to pretend that any one part of us is going to save us, and any one part of us is the scapegoat, that if we could just get rid of it, then the rest of us will be free. I guess I really want to challenge that. I think that's fundamentally false. I think the best cognitive science that I'm aware of would argue, no, if you have a part of your psyche, it's got to function. And you better find out what that function is, as opposed to either deifying it and saying it will lead me to enlightenment, or demonizing it and saying that's the thing that I have to get rid of. Well, there are times when you need to be egocentric. If you're falling off a bridge, you need to be radically egocentric. Yeah. You need to be really, really, really egocentric. Right? There's times when you shouldn't be egocentric. When your child is making a mistake that you've made, and the thing you want to do is tell them about how you made this mistake and you don't want them to make it, and it's not the right time to do it. And you have to forego living vicariously through your child and try to see what they need in their context and how they're seeing things. There's times when you need to be egocentric. There's times when you should transcend your egocentrism, when it's biasing you in a self-deceptive way. And so that's why I try to use Chris and I try to use the translucency metaphor. So if you're completely unaware of your egocentrism, and you can never take your glasses off, and you're always looking through it, it's always completely transparent, that's a problem for you.
Yeah.
Right? But if you're always taking your glasses off, right, you're not ever going to be able to relate to the world, to connect to the world. You're an agent, right? So try to get an optimal grip on your egocentrism that renders it translucent to you, so that you're aware of it, but you can also be aware through it when it's appropriate, because you have needs that need to be met. But you also need to overcome the salience, the super salience of the self, because it is not the center of reality. So you want to ultimately be ontocentric, but you don't, that means reality centric, but you don't, I would argue, people are going to disagree with me, I would argue that's not accomplished by trying to eradicate your ego.
Wow.
Instead, find Socratic self-knowledge, find out, use the best science around, read the best philosophy, talk to people who you have good reason to believe have acquired some reflective wisdom and virtue and maturity. Find out what the function of each part is and how it's functioning in you and what place it has within the ecology of your psyche. And try to get, this is Plato's model, try to get an inner community, inner justice. That's optimal.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. It's amazing to hear you. And, you know, it's exciting because it's a genuine desire that I have and that I want to pursue. It's more, you know, rather than one of the traps that I fall into sometimes is just trying to intellectualize truth, you know, intellectualize that I understand everything, I can rationalize everything, and it's a blind spot.
Yeah.
I've seen that rather than actually actively engaging in truth, which is, as we mentioned previously, uncomfortable sometimes, I'm defending against it, you know?
Yes, and you're defending against the things, and I get that.
Yeah.
But what I heard you saying, though, at least what it sounded in implication was, but that doesn't mean what you're going to do is eradicate your reason. Because I rationalize, I'm going to destroy my reason. It's like, no, stop rationalizing and try to find out a more appropriate function. Yeah. One of the hardest things, and I'll be a little bit personal here, I'm going through this right now in my life. Like right now, today, is trying to figure out how parts of myself are functional. What I mean by that is, like you, I can see particular patterns being dysfunctional, but I want to resist the simplistic, and I would even say stupid, thing of, well, what I need to do is eradicate that part of me. It's like trying to really engage in a relationship with that part and trying to find within all of the maelstrom of its malfunctionality how it's actually trying to help you.
Right.
And and if you'll allow me, try to enter into a relationship with it so you can give it a better job where it gets along better with the rest of the psyche and catches up, because it's probably living in the past in some way or living in some fantasy future that's unrealistic. I don't know if that's making any sense, but
it truly is. It truly is, and thank you for you know, sharing with me. And I couldn't agree more that oftentimes we feel it's better to, I feel it's better to intervene, you know, and, you know, put a band-aid towards the issue rather than just, you know, I'm lucky to say this, but we're living in a world where risks are not that risky as compared to earlier years, even though paradoxically we're living in a risky year with the pandemic. So you know what I'm saying?
And a risky civilization. So we have a civilization. I agree with you. We have a civilization, and I'm going to use a different way of talking about it, but it's equally accurate. But it brings something up. We have a civilization that has made our individual lives very error tolerant.
What does that mean?
What that means is we can engage in pretty significant self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, and we won't be dead at the end of the day.
Oh, wow.
Right? And by the way, that's good, right? And by the way, whenever people are trying to go through significant transformation, like children or individuals, they often need an environment that is more error tolerant because they need to make mistakes that won't cost them their life, right?
I get it now. Yeah.
So again, notice what I'm trying to do. It has a function, and trying to make things error tolerant is a powerful way of functioning, development, like helping to afford growth and development. And so again, there's a good thing there.
Mhm.
But the price we pay for that, right, is that our lives, if we don't counterbalance that with something where we take on the task of making the errors more costly for ourselves.
Wow. Yeah.
It's like when you're learning a martial art, like it has to be a safe environment, but it can't be, right? Like if you go in and and you think people are just going to beat the crap out of you, then then you're not going to learn anything. So there has to be an ethic of respect and safety, but that doesn't mean you're not going to get physically hurt.
Yeah.
And if you again, it's about sorry, this sounds like so mediocre, but so trying to get that balance between, yes, we have a civilization that's become, right, really made us safe, and but here's my criticism: it is elevating safety and security to such a high level, like that, like we need to be able to put our lifestyles at risk in order to detect the way they are in error and the way they are undermining our society and our biological environment.
Wow. No, you're absolutely right. It feels like we're in the bubble wrap of society, and it got me thinking into, evolutionary sense, which is, we haven't improved, so to say, our mechanisms for adaptability. I was speaking with a friend just recently about this, haven't been so stress test, but rather we've been the other side of ourselves, trying to not adapt to environment, but rather make the environment adapt to us, so to say. It's
Yes, and we are more and more. We used to have a more balanced relationship. See, so when a child is learning, the child is constantly Piaget talked about it. The child is constantly moving between assimilation, making the world adapt to it, either by changing the environment or changing the internal, like changing the interpretation.
Yeah.
Right? That's assimilation. But the child also has to accommodate. The child has to change and conform and adapt to the world. And Piaget talked about equilibration, where you get a dynamic balance between those, a flow back and forth, right? A yin and yang kind of thing.
Yeah.
But we are now, and we used to have that, I think, as a society, or at least maybe, it's hard to tell. We used to have a more used to have more equilibration between our society and the environment. And I think we have progressively lost that. Probably starts in, the Middle Ages, when get the ascendant. I talked about this in the series, the ascendance of the faculty of will and the beginning of the conquest of nature, as opposed to the stewardship of nature and things like that. Our collective intelligence is being infantilized. It's being kept at the level of a child. So think about how a parent always is shaping the world to the child. And so the child, right? But what a good parent does is and a good society does is they slowly diminish that bubble wrapping so that the child is capable of going into the world.
Yeah.
But I'm not so sure we're doing that so much as a society anymore, as a culture, as a civilization.
Yeah, and it's paradoxically coming to us to haunt us, the same thing, because as it connects with the emails in our minds, unread emails. Everything is just gathering its own force, and
yes,
trying to gradually engage with, as you said, being an agent in a world of action, so to say. We're dismissing the gems of wisdom that we can have by removing the bubble wraps suddenly. But this has become, evident in with the lockdowns and the pandemic and culture wars, that we will engage with this rapidly, and we may not be as prepared as we thought. Our tools of self-growth today seems to be an Instagram post or a blog post.
Yeah, and there's accumulating evidence that system, I don't even know if I should call it that, but that system of social support is actually very unhealthy. Like it's very unhealthy for your mental health. And yet we are more and more driven into it.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
I want to say something quickly, because as you said, it's unhealthy, and you're the expert on this, so that I don't want to forget. I've been thinking on people who post on Instagram, their selfie, their picture, their everything. I feel like if Freud would see that, if Freud would see how we're externalizing our higher self, but literally seeing it, because before having Instagram, before having social media and all of this, we would still have the alter, how do you say, alter ego? No, is it, what's the
alterity?
Yeah. Our higher, who we want to be, and we would think of it, but today we actually have to deal with it. We have to deal with our posts and seeing in a literal image who we want to be in the world. So I feel like it creates this association between who you are and
It does, and it's again pseudo-religious. So I mean, in the third century, the Mediterranean world is swept, and it's gone into many different sort of mystical traditions. But the idea of the divine double, right? That we have a higher self that we should aspire to, and it's got mythology wrapped around it. And it's amazing to me how we're rediscovering these ancient forms, but we discover them bereft of any of the transformational practices. Is right. So, oh, you want a divine double? Here it is. You put on the best picture of yourself, and here's the perfect meal that you have it's all fraud, because it's not representing your life, and it's not representing a life anybody can aspire to.
Yeah.
Realistically. And that's why, of course, it causes depression, it causes anxiety, it causes a diminishment of people's sense of self-worth. It shows all of that, right? That's what the research is showing predominantly. It's like, if you want to, right, you should instead adopt a model of a sacred second self that is simultaneously challenging, will reveal your errors like we were talking about, but also possible, and will meet you and challenge you to realize, in both senses of the word, yourself, rather than fabricate yourself.
Wow.
So, and so we have the models of Socrates and Jesus and Siddhartha and Marcus Aurelius and Lao Tse, and we have all of these models, of people that can perform that role, and communities and traditions around them that can help us. But instead, we go for the simulation, the superficial simulation of the function. See, we're hungry for the function. That's why we get attracted to it. But we're caught up in its superficial salience, but it affords no depth of understanding. And therefore, while triggering the function of self-aspiration, it is ultimately deeply frustrating it. And so we get hungry and we try more, and we need more connections, we need more postings. And it's, why am I doing this? And why am I spending 8 hours a day on my screen doing and that's why, because again, it's triggering a real healthy function, but triggering it in a malfunctioning way.
It's impressive, because as I feel this sense of urgency of trying to become wiser in a rapid sense, because I don't think that time is not ticking, the doomsday clock is ticking.
Yeah.
And I feel like everyone must be in the same train, but at the same time, yeah, go ahead.
But that's brilliant what you're saying. Like I hadn't put that together, but what you just did there, that was brilliant. There's a legitimate urgency, and therefore it's very tempting, and I'm trying to use that word charitably, to go for quick fix functionality because it's so urgent. But the fact that it's urgent doesn't mean we can escape the necessary hard work.
Yeah.
That's a very good point you just made. Thank you for that. That's a very, very good point.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm not joking. It's something that it's really, on a day-by-day basis that I feel like the world is not waiting for me to become enlightened. So I might as do it now, today.
Yeah.
So I can improve things. I can be in a place of agency and truly, engage in change, to put my best self out there. But at the same time, you can't pursue wisdom. It's paradoxical. It's a spell breaker. You can't do it. It comes to you. It comes through you, so to say.
Yeah, that's why I've been trying to get people more and more aware of this notion of participation. I forget who said it. There's a famous line that says, enlightenment is not found by seeking, but only those who seek it will realize enlightenment.
Wow.
So if you don't seek, you won't be enlightened, but you won't become enlightened because you're seeking.
Right. It's an impossible task.
Well, it's also the trying not to try. But it's like think about it again. Friendship. Let's use that as a model. Can you just wait for friendship? Good luck. Are you going to go out? You're going to be my friend. You're going to make somebody your friend? No. What do? Right? You participate in it. You do things, but you also right, be receptive to things done to you. And you have to participate. You have to cultivate the conditions and let them change you as you're trying to change the condition. And that's how you become friends. Right. And so I like the Buddhist metaphor. It's also a Socratic metaphor, I found out, but I learned it originally with it from my Buddhist practices. That the pursuit of enlightenment is a lifetime commitment to befriending yourself. And if you do nothing, you'll just have a superficial relationship. If you just try, I'm going to be enlightened now. All of my parts, change. It's not going to happen.
Wow.
But you can befriend yourself. And and like all real friendship, it has to have a life of its own, and it takes time and sacrifice, and unavoidable mistakes. It's not in the sense that these mistakes are avoidable, but that that you can't do this without making mistakes. So that's what I meant.
To put it in my perspective is I cannot see 20 years from today, 30 years from today, and not having a much better relationship with myself, and truly getting into the edge of who I am. I cannot I cannot see superficiality driving my life.
Well, that's good. I mean, one of the things that I'm still learning, but I think it's becoming clear enough that I feel confident to recommend it, is and it's good you have this, but that desire for genuine self-knowledge is inseparable from a commitment to really getting to know other people as they are, right, rather than as you want them to be, which is hard.
Yeah.
And but worth it.
Yeah. And going back into the quote that I mentioned from your book, Zombies in Western Civilization, is we are more strangers than ever, and that might be a good thing, as yes, you were saying.
It could be. It can be. So one of the benefits of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series, I've been exposed, and I choose that word carefully, to a lot of people. And I use exposure because we talk about sort of social exposure, especially if you're socially phobic, which I tend to be, because I'm an introvert by nature. that's, I mean, I wouldn't have been talking to you without going on to social media and doing the YouTube series.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, talking deeply and seriously to somebody that I don't know very well, right? And, you know, and not that you haven't exemplified being trustworthy. You have. I'm not criticizing at all. I'm pointing out that this is an instance of what I'm talking about.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just we're afforded a real opportunity with social media of going the other way, of cultivating fellowship as distinct from where you really know somebody, friendship. And again, pursue your friendships. I'm not denying that. I'm encouraging that. Or fellowship is also other than acquaintanceship. You know, the people that, you know, you regularly see at the convenience store. You want to treat people decently, and, you know, they're your acquaintances. I get that. And you may even have buddies, people that you play D&D with or something like that, or go to, you know, a hockey game with, of course. But we really need fellowship. And for all of the deleterious dangers that we've been talking about with social media, there is also the real power to afford the cultivation of fellowship. I've been very encouraged by what Sevilla King calls this corner of the internet, where there's all these communities building, and they're all connecting with each other, and they're all talking with each other, and there's diversity in unity. There isn't homogeneity. You know, there are people that are you know, confessed Christians, and people who are not, and people who are Buddhists. It's all over. But nevertheless, there is real dialogos. There's real connection, and so that has shown that social media can be a place in which philia, the philia of Sophia, is genuinely possible, and that's encouraging.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope to keep engaging in that way with my own account, with my own social media, and, you know, be close to people who want to do that as well. Yeah, Professor, I'm mindful of your time, and this has been, you know, again, I mean, 12 out of a 10 conversation. And, you know, let's not wait another time that the world turns upside down so we can have another round. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
We'll stay in touch.
For sure.